But first, the CIA, and here to talk about its role in a very difficult and complicated world is General Michael Hayden, his first Sunday morning interview as director of the CIA. General, welcome.
Morning, Jim.
This was the scene yesterday in Basra, Iraq. Shiite militiamen on the streets holding their weapons. What is going on in Basra, Iraq?
What we have is a very decisive act on the part of Prime Minister Maliki to get personally involved and commit his forces and his government to extending Iraqi government control over parts of Iraq that frankly have not been under much central government control now for several years. It's a very decisive moment. It's a very challenging thing. I guess one would say that success is not guaranteed, but when I talked to my analysts on Friday afternoon, they said that based on this effort, they expect the situation in Iraq to be better at the end of what's going on now than it was at the beginning.
There are reports that the Prime Minister miscalculated the seriousness and the difficulty of rooting out the Shiite militiamen who had taken control of Basra.
It's a very difficult challenge that he strapped on. He strapped it on largely with his own forces, the ISF, the Iraqi security forces. It has proven to be very, very difficult, but I think the real telling moment, the real crossover point in all of this is the political decision to take action. I mean, a lot of people in this country have criticized the Iraqis for not stepping up, for not taking advantage of the breathing space that's been created by, frankly, coalition military activity. Here's a case of an Iraqi leader stepping up.
This is an article, Friday's paper. Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki decided to launch the offensive without consulting his U.S. allies, according to administration officials. With little U.S. presence in the south and British forces in Basra confined to an air base outside the city, one administration official said that, quote, "We can't quite decipher what is going on. It's a question," he said, of, quote, "who's got the best conspiracy theory about why Maliki decided to act now." The United States was not informed by the Iraqis that he was going to do this?
I don't know what went on the ground in Baghdad prior to the operation. I do know that this was a decision of the Iraqi government by the Prime Minister and personally by the Prime Minister, and that he's relying on Iraqi forces, by and large, to take this action.
Were you aware of it?
I was, in terms of being pre-briefed or having, you know, the normal planning process in which you build up to this days or weeks ahead of time, no, I was not.
You didn't know what was going to happen?
No more so than Dave Petraeus or Ambassador Crocker did.
About 70% of the city of Basra controlled by Shiite militia. Is the goal to have that entire city controlled by the Iraqi government?
Of course it is. But this is going to have to happen in stages. And you're right, about 70% of the city controlled by militia, armed gangs, criminal elements. It's a real stew down there, Jim, in terms of the different factions. And they were in a bit of an equilibrium between and among these armed factions over the past several months, and violence had been reduced. But I don't think anyone could think that that equilibrium was an acceptable long-term solution.
The Prime Minister said that the elements that were controlling Basra are, quote, worse than al-Qaeda. Do you agree with that?
Their activity has mirrored some of the atrocities of al-Qaeda. I don't know that I'd try to sit back here and put a moral calculus on either of them, but I do know this. Right? They were beyond the writ of the Iraqi government. They were exercising the attributes of sovereignty. I mean, the exclusive use of violence, for example, that should be the province of the Iraqi state.
I want to go back to 07, when Bob Woodward wrote a piece in the Washington Post about comments you made to the Iraqi study group, and have a chance to talk about that regarding Iraq. On the morning of November 13, 2006, members of the bipartisan Iraq study group gathered in the Roosevelt Room of the White House. CIA Director Michael Hayden said, quote, "The inability of the Iraqi government to govern seems irreversible," adding that he could not point to any milestone or checkpoint where he can turn this thing around, according to written records of his briefing and the recollection of 6 participants. The government is unable to govern, Hayden concluded. "We spent a lot of energy and treasure creating a government that is balanced, and it cannot function." Is that an accurate assessment of what you said?
It was an incomplete assessment of what I said. What I said was inability to govern or turn this around in the short term is what I precisely said. And then I tried to use a sports metaphor. I talked about running a marathon. And what I said to the group there was I'd run a marathon in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh's pretty hilly, as you know. And at about mile 21, there's a 2-mile downhill stretch. And when you get down to the bottom of that hill, It's only 3 miles to the finish, and you run 3 miles before church on Sunday. So I knew if I got to mile 22, there was a natural break that would begin to turn things into my favor. What I was saying to the commission was there were no longer any natural breaks lying ahead of us that would turn things in our favor. It had to be done with just slogging through hard work. There were no upcoming elections, for example, no upcoming changes in the political structure that would be natural breaks. That's what I was trying to say to the committee.
Was the surge a natural break?
The surge created an opportunity. The surge, in its own way, was an artificial imposition of a break. It changed the equation. That's exactly what it did, and allowed some space for the Iraqis to step up, and they've begun to do that.
Could Prime Minister Maliki have been successful in Basra, if in fact he is, without considerable U.S. air power and operational support on the ground?
Well, we'll see. Only now do we begin to see perhaps an increased reliance on coalition firepower. You know, we've made the point when people talk about the American troop presence in Iraq that it's not so much coalition power, coalition combat power that's the measure. What you need is combat power that is competent and even-handed, and that over time we would expect more and more of that definition to be met by Iraqi security forces. Now you see Maliki trying to do this now, and frankly, he may not have enough Iraqi competent and even-handed combat power to pull this off, hence the need for some coalition support.
In fact, you said 2 weeks ago that an abrupt pullout of U.S. troops from Iraq would remove needed competent and even-handed combat power from the country. We're not at the point where the Iraqis can provide all of that, and I don't think we'll be at that point for some time.
That's correct.
What is it for some time?
The better experts on this are going to be coming into town next week. Dave Petraeus, the commander of multinational forces in Iraq, and Ambassador Crocker. I think they'll be able to give a better description of it. But what I was trying to express when I said that, this is not something that's going to happen next week or next month. This is going to be a gradual slope as Iraqis, again, build this competence in terms of their combat power and apply it in a more even-handed way.
It's going to take years.
I think so.
The report from Iraq was supposed to be given to Congress, I believe, on today. It's being delayed somewhat. Is that because of the situation in Basra?
I'm sorry, the report?
From Iraq, from General Petraeus?
I'm just not aware of the precise timeline.
Do you think this military activity in Basra is a setback for political reconciliation in Iraq?
You know, Tim, this was something that we all knew we had to go through. This was inevitable. This had to be resolved. You just can't have the second major city in the country, economically the most important city in the country, beyond the control of the government. And so although, there's a certain sense of, what's the right word, Tim, disappointment in that the fact that violence is increasing, we knew we couldn't get to where we had to be for the Iraqi state, for a modern democratic Iraqi state, without going through this.